My name is Jake Peterson, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a decent two-bedroom condo in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood with my wife, Emma. Well, I should say my soon-to-be ex-wife. It still doesn't feel real, you know. Just a couple months ago, my life was completely different. I was putting in long hours at the corporate law firm, sure, but Emma and I made it work, or so I thought. It was a total accident how I found out about her cheating. I was just looking for some old photos from when we first met, happy memories to cheer myself up from another 70-hour workweek. Emma had an ancient laptop she claimed was busted, so I grabbed the dusty thing from our storage closet and pulled the drive. That's when I saw it. Hundreds of photos and videos of her and her scuzzy ex-boyfriend Steven going at it like hormonal teenagers. The sick part? She's wearing the locket I gifted her on our first anniversary in a bunch of them. Those timestamps put the affairs square in the middle of our relationship. Jake shook his head slowly, replaying that gut punch of a moment. "What the hell, Emma?" he muttered under his breath, the anger reflexively rising again. At first, I didn't know how to react. I just felt numb, like someone had pulled the ground from underneath me. The rage came later, once the shock wore off slightly, not just at her, but at myself for being so damn blind and naive. I grabbed a duffel bag and haphazardly packed some clothes and essentials. My brother Matt lives just a few miles away, so I crashed on his couch for a couple nights to get some space and clarity. Before I left, I made sure to leave Emma a Zapruder-level money shot of her and Steven on the computer monitor. Let her connect those dots, I had thought bitterly. The first 2 days, my phone was an ongoing tsunami of texts and calls from her. Blubbering voicemails pleading with me to let her explain that she was so sorry and it was a regrettable mistake. I just couldn't. Not yet. I needed time to let it all marinate. It felt like my life was suddenly stuck in some sort of vivid industrial laundromat spin cycle. My job performance was suffering as I stared blankly at legal files, my mind circulously replaying her betrayal on an endless loop of disbelief and hurt. How could someone I loved so deeply do this to me? I've read about the 5 stages of grief, but I never imagined myself being on that emotional roller coaster. After the initial shock and anger surrounding Emma's affairs, a sort of hollowed-out numbness set in. Some days, I could almost convince myself it was all an insane misunderstanding. Maybe those photos were, like, from some ridiculous role-play thing. I'd grasp at straws in my head. People get up to weird kinky shit behind closed doors. Of course, deep down I knew I was delusional. The timestamps and contextual evidence were way too concrete to rationalize away. Still, the mind can play devious tricks when your reality has been shattered into a million pieces. I tried going back to our place a week after the discovery, prepared to finally hear Emma out. I'll admit, seeing her answering the door, puffy-eyed and disheveled, actually tugged at my heartstrings for a split second, until she opened her mouth. "Emma, Jake, oh my God, you're here." She wrapped her arms around me fiercely. "I've been so worried, baby. Please, just give me one chance to explain." I gently pushed away from the embrace, keeping my emotions boarded up behind a stoic expression. "Jake, save it, Emma. I can't do this right now. I just need some space to process everything." She burst into fresh tears, grabbing desperately at my arm. I had never seen her look more unraveled. "Emma, no, you don't understand. It was just a foolish mistake during a low point in our relationship. I love you so much, baby. You have to believe me." But I didn't believe her anymore. How could I? Too many anniversary dinners and intimate moments we shared felt forever tainted by her lies. I pulled away silently and left, feeling paradoxically both hollowed out and overwhelmed. In those early days, I damn near drowned myself in self-doubt. Was I really such an insufferable hole that it justified Emma's actions? Did I work too many hours and neglect our relationship in ways I was too oblivious to see? My self-confidence was shattered along with my trust. Looking back, it was a toxic mind spiral I temporarily got consumed by. Emma's infidelity wasn't my cross to bear. It was a selfish violation of trust and decision she alone owned. As the saying goes, it's not my circus, not my monkeys. A few weeks after the initial discovery, I finally felt ready to properly consult with a divorce lawyer. A friend referred me to Grace McKinley, an absolute barracuda in the courtroom from what I'd heard. Our first meeting, she wasted no time laying out my options. Grace, based on what you've told me about your wife's indiscretions, you have a very strong case for an uncontested divorce. She slid a file across her desk towards me. I opened it to find a sickening array of incriminating evidence, NAFs, shady money transfers, hotel charges, and more buried in our financial records. Jake, what the hell is all this? Grace, very strong evidence that your wife's affairs weren't just a one-off mistake, Mr. Peterson. I did some digging through your accounts, and the paper trail suggests this was an ongoing string of deceit over multiple years. I felt like I'd been smashed over the head with a sledgehammer. Just when I thought the betrayal couldn't cut any deeper, it was somehow being crushed to nightmarish new levels. Jake, so you're telling me she was actively lying and cheating on me the entire time, with multiple guys? Grace nodded grimly. In that moment, any whiff of remaining hope I clung to about salvaging our marriage dissipated completely. Emma had nuked that bridge into oblivion. Over the next couple months, life became a robotically cold cycle of legal proceedings. Every week, there'd be some new mediation or deposition to stoically sit through, watching a parade of evidence showcasing my wife's lies and deceptions. Hours of my time wasted as our lawyers bickered over assets and finances. Emma's legal team tried every trick to frame her infidelity as some temporary lapse of judgment brought on by a troubled marriage. They painted her as this sympathetic victim who had simply grown apart from me. Their sad puppy dog routine made me want to vomit. Honestly, if it wasn't for Grace's ruthless competence and cold-blooded guidance, I might have lost my grip on reality altogether. She cross-examined Emma's stories to shreds, never missing a chance to draw fresh humiliation about her continual gaslighting and unfaithfulness. After interminable court dates, runarounds, and bad faith arguments from the other side, it was finally over. We were granted an uncontested divorce, and miraculously, the proceedings had actually ended up declawing most of Emma's financial claims against me thanks to Grace's expertise. As I left the courthouse that final day, I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of, well, numbness more than anything, like the air had finally been sucked out of a perverse reality show I'd been trapped in for months. I was exhausted, yet relieved to close that treacherous chapter of deception. There was still plenty of uncertainty and healing ahead, but at least now, the malignant tumor devouring my life had finally been cut out. I could start reconstructing my sense of self, one step at a time. With the divorce finally behind me, I have to admit, those next few months were weird. On one hand, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like a heavy anchor had been cut loose. No more constant dread and stress clouding every aspect of my life. But there were also these bizarre stretches of emptiness. My identity had become so intertwined with being Emma's husband that her absence left a palpable void. Who was I outside of that defining relationship? Rather than wallow, I tried reactivating my sense of self. I leaned hard on my friends and family for moral support. Guys like my brother Matt became lifelines, always down to grab beers and pizza, or just act as supportive sounding boards. Matt: look man, what she did was absolutely shitty, but you can't let it consume and paralyze you forever. Jake: I know. It's just, I feel so foolish, like I wasted years of my life on a lie. Matt put his hand on my shoulder with a look of sympathy. Matt: don't be so hard on yourself, bro. Emma was the liar and cheater here. That's on her. Your job now is to focus on dusting yourself off and rediscovering who you are. His pep talk didn't magically cure me overnight, but it was a checklist I did gradually start working through. I consciously scheduled more social outings and activities outside of the office. I'd even tried some new hobbies like boxing and hiking to get out of my head. Most importantly, I made more of an effort to appreciate the small joys in life that I'd neglected when consumed by despair. Sleeping in on weekends, listening to my favorite albums front to back with a bottle of Maker's Mark, relishing the simple act of reading in absolute silence. Slowly but surely, I started feeling like a weight was being chipped off my shoulders. The resentment and hurt still lingered, but they didn't have that all-consuming power over me anymore. I was rediscovering my independent identity. Some days, I'd catch glimpses of that renewal reflected in how I carried myself. Maybe it was feeling recentered after a solid workout, or cooking an elaborate meal for myself, savoring every bite with intentionality. Little by little, I was evolving into a new, more actualized version of myself. It wasn't a seamless, linear process by any stretch. There were still occasional rough nights battling loneliness or replaying Emma's betrayal in my mind. In those moments, though, I'd take a breath and recenter myself with a saying I adopted as a mantra: she's someone else's battle now. With each passing week and small milestone of personal growth, I felt those words ringing truer in my mind, body, and spirit. I was shedding that weight of emotional wreckage and rediscovering my core resilience. This was the reinvention chapter I never asked for, but one I intended to attack with purpose. As I clawed my way out of the emotional trenches, an unexpected upside started emerging. My newfound freedom was reinvigorating my work ethic and drive at the law firm. Not having to subsidize Emma's perpetual student status anymore lifted a massive financial weight off my back. Sure, the divorce had been a six-figure legal hellscape, but it was a worthwhile investment to surgically remove that cancerous money pit from my life. I was finally unshackled from the constant stress of trying to fund her never-ending academic pursuits. With that cloud lifted, I could refocus my energy on what initially drew me to corporate law in the first place, an inherent ambition to be one of the sharpest legal minds in the profession. My reawakened hunger must have shown because my bosses at the firm started really taking notice. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I'll never forget the morning Jim Fletcher, one of the managing partners, summoned me into his office. "Jim Peterson, do you have a minute?" Closed the door. I felt a brief flash of anxiety. Had I maybe been too gung-ho in a client meeting recently? Overstepped somewhere? "Jim, relax, you're not in trouble," he chuckled, clearly sensing my nerves. "Quite the opposite, actually. Your work these past few quarters has been exemplary. Arbitration briefs that keep opposing counsel awake at night, contract language tighter than a swimmer's unitard. You've really been crushing it." "Jake, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate the feedback. I've just been trying to airlock out any external distractions and really bear down on developing my skills." Jim nodded approvingly, steepling his fingers on his desk. "Jim, that dedication hasn't gone unnoticed, which is why I think you're finally ready to be staffed on the Hamilton Aerospace litigation next quarter. It'll be a total baptism by fire, but I know you can handle the spotlight. What do you say? I'll admit, I was briefly stunned into silence. The Hamilton Aerospace case was arguably the highest profile, highest stakes corporate litigation our firm had taken on in over a decade. It would essentially be my initiatory burn into the upper echelons of the white shoe ranks. Jake, say, are you kidding me? I'm honored, sir, and ready to prove myself. I flashed a confident smile, but deep down my heart was pounding with excitement. This felt like the first profound career rebirth since my life's previous chapter, a cosmic realignment of how the chips fell in my favor after so much upheaval and anguish. From that point on, I transformed into an absolute gunner at work. I routinely pulled 90-hour work weeks, devouring every case file and legal brief like gospel ahead of court dates. Opposing counsel's snakiest technical arguments and semantic wordsmithing were met with stalwart preparation and counterattacks from me. After months of hearings, deposits, and endless strategizing, the big verdict finally came down. Hamilton Aerospace's case was essentially rendered inert thanks to our airtight contract audits and defenses against their claims. Securing that massive, decisive win felt like the chef's kiss on my professional redemption arc. Shortly after, the firm announced their newest round of promotions and compensation adjustments. And I have to admit, I may have done a little private fist pump in my corner office upon reading my name among the elect. All those innumerable nights burning the midnight oil, sacrificing my social life for the sake of nailing these cases. It had paid off in spades. As I settled into my luxurious new window office housing the corner view I'd always envied, I ruminated on just how dramatically different my life's trajectory looked compared to a year ago. Back then, I was a jaded husk mired in cynicism, hollowed out by the compounding betrayals from my marriage. Now, I'd metamorphed into this high-powered legal shark, granted access to the uppermost career echelons I'd worked relentlessly towards. My personal redemption was made tangible by the material trappings and niceties I'd acquired. Did it completely fill that gnawing void born from Emma's treachery? Not entirely. Some scars never fully heal, no matter how well you dress them up. But it was a soothing salve knowing I'd emerged from the ashes of that destruction to claim my own resounding victories. I'd been to hell and back emotionally, yet here I stood, gainfully employed at the top of my professional game. If I could conquer that adversity, no future challenges seemed insurmountable. Not anymore. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be where I am today, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, the pain and humiliation from Emma's betrayal felt like an inescapable pit of despair. My self-worth and identity were in tatters. But time does have an uncanny way of remolding perspectives. As the months passed, that molten anguish slowly metamorphosed into a philosophical awakening about who I really was as a person. What defined my character beyond my marital status? Looking back, being forced to stare into that abyss of emotional desolation was tragically fortunate. It forced me to confront how I had been sleepwalking through life, coasting on comfortable complacencies without truly actualizing my potential. The man I've rebuilt myself into is far more present, confident, and purposeful. These days, my social circle has expanded exponentially from those early days of licking my wounds. I've cultivated a solid crew of like-minded bachelor friends who revel in simple pleasures, a fantasy football obsession, microbrewery tours, weekend camping trips upstate. Just a genuine, unpretentious crew of dudes with whom I can intimately be myself around. Professionally, I've ascended even higher at the firm since that career renaissance. The high-profile victories and billing records have padded both my experience and bank account nicely. My penthouse apartment overlooking the Chicago River is a sweet living upgrade from the condo remnants of my previous life. But I've made sure not to let the material indulgences consume me this time around. those niceties are just a gilded facade without nurturing the internal transformation I've undertaken. Making time to exercise, meditate, and pursue artistic passions like writing and photography, expanding my intellectual horizons through hobbies like astrophotography and mixology classes. All of it fuels a more robustly actualized version of myself. Physically, mentally, spiritually. I'm no longer that jaded, disaffected workaholic blindly chasing mercurial relationship fantasies. My purpose is rebuilding genuine happiness from the inside out. Have I completely exorcised the demons left behind from Emma's betrayal? Of course not. Those scars will always linger to some extent, but they no longer possess that overriding power to drive my emotions and mindset into toxic depths. I've evolved beyond being that broken man, forever trapped in the purgatory of what-ifs and resentment. These days, I honestly feel content with how the chips fell in reframing my life's trajectory, even if the path getting here was brutally hellacious at times. I'm grateful for the self-work and renewed self-actualization that arose from that turmoil. Sure, I may never want to revisit the horrors of my divorce ever again, but I've repurposed that agony into the catalyst for personal rebirth and growth. So many people remain permanently stuck in those shame cycles after being cheated on or dealt devastating blows like I endured, paralyzed by hatred and unhealed traumas from the past. But having lived through that gauntlet, I can definitively say that embittered existence is optional if you're willing to confront your pain mindfully. The pathway to inner peace and reclaiming your sense of self absolutely exists. It just takes an immense amount of vulnerability and perseverance to walk it. I guess the biggest lesson I've taken away is that we all possess incredible resilience reservoirs to endure even our darkest, most hopeless feeling crucibles. If you just keep putting one foot in front of the other with intention, you'll eventually find yourself on the other side of that abyss, reborn with a more grounded sense of self. It's not an easy road by any means, but I can proudly look at myself in the mirror today, acknowledge how goddamn far I've come, and genuinely appreciate the man reforging his own destiny, one purposeful step at a time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, share our story, and I'll see you all again very soon.